I want to thank you so much for listening to this conversation with me and my friend Greg. We've been doing ministry together for almost 2 years at a church that he helped to plan and start, which is amazing. Like I said in the interview, Greg is one of the smartest people that I know, but I want to go beyond that. Not only does he have a lot of information about the Christian faith and ministry, but he is wise with that information. He is a good steward of that information. So you get to see that in this conversation, which is something that I'm really grateful for. And I want to implore you, if you would like to continue this conversation or continue to be exposed to Greg and his perspective, I would encourage you to look at his blog at devoutway.wordpress.com. That's how you can access his blog. And you can also access some of his meditations that he's given at our church, or even some of the classes that he's taught at youtube.com/@DFBHAM. That is DFBHAM. So those are two ways that you can further engage with Greg and his perspective. And of course, if you want to continue the discussion with me, you can email me at hargonw@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.
Well, I'm here with who I would call a friend. I hope you consider me a friend.
Good. I
yeah,
hope so.
yeah, and I'm just grateful that you've agreed to another conversation, and we just wanted to explore a really big question with you. And first of all, before I even go into the question, I wonder. I know you've been in ministry for over 40 years at this point.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering at this point, as I'm dealing with this question, is this a valid question to be wrestling with? you know, what has been your experience with those that have wrestled with this question? And yeah, that's kind of the big question that I'll offer before we.
Yeah, I think it's a very pertinent question. Probably not one that I was asking 30 years ago as much,
Mhm.
but I think it becomes more relevant to ask that question. Well, what really does it mean to be a Christian? How do we think about that?
Yeah.
And my say not in terms of others, but what does it mean for me to say I'm trying to be a Christian? What does that mean? What does that look like? So I think it's a very valid question. Yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah. And I appreciate that because you're the smartest person I know. I have access to you. I can talk to you anytime, and so it feels good to have that question. First of all, be validated. This is a worthy question, and secondly, to have you explore that question with. And so, yeah, I just want to start with that. Like, what do you think it means? Maybe historically, what it's meant, and maybe, yeah,
Okay.
how far back we want to go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in one way, it'd be easy to give kind of a dictionary sort of definition,
Uh-huh.
but that doesn't really get us very far if we say, well, a Christian is someone who follows the way of Jesus, or a Christian is someone who, adheres to the Christian faith.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we're not really saying anything because the question would follow to me to be, well, but who do you understand Jesus to be, and what is his way like?
Yeah.
Because if I just say, well, a Christian is someone who follows the way of Jesus, there's a lot of different versions of what people are saying the way of Jesus is about. Interpretations of, well, what is his ministry? What is his message? What is his life?
Yeah.
So unless we get down to something more specific, those definitions aren't helpful. And I think in that sense, the meaning of what it means to be a Christian has to also be given a certain time and place. Because if it is following the way of Jesus, in setting aside first, okay, who is Jesus and what did he talk about? But it's doing that in a particular time and space,
Yeah.
and under certain circumstances. And so while the generalization would be true, the question is, well, how do we today, right now, this year, in this, wherever we find ourselves,
Yeah.
what does it look like to follow Jesus?
That's right.
And what is he saying? That's why I think it's an ongoing question. It's an important question because if we're not asking it, then we're not trying to be incarnational in the way that we're living, and we might just have some sort of anachronistic idea that used to work in another time and place, and we're just adhering to it. And we're now no longer living in a vital way, the way of Jesus, for our time and place. So, yeah, so that's why I think it's a very important, like you were saying, I think it's a very important question. And if we're not asking it, we should be.
Yeah.
Because although Jesus doesn't change, our times change, and what we're facing changes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are some of my thoughts for starters.
Yeah.
Is there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Um,
And starting with your view of Jesus, maybe.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
how he translates into where you are.
yeah, and the view of Jesus that is relevant for your time and place. So it would seem to me that certain aspects of what Jesus taught and did seem to rise up as more crucial given what the challenges are in our time and what's going on in our lives or in the lives of our friends and family and community. So on all these different scales, from the individual scale to the, the larger community, or even kind of a, the whole group of your people, whoever that is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a relevant question, and it's always in flux. So what leaps out, to me, like where I find we are in our culture right now, things, I mean, it would seem like Jesus has a lot to say about the way we become consumers. Now, people following the way of Jesus in other times and places, consumerism was not an issue that was like challenging their fidelity to the way of Christ. But I think for us it is.
Yeah.
So so then I think then we look at what Jesus taught, what Jesus did, and try and derive from that, what is he wanting us to do given this, hyper consumeristic, people are commodities and everything else is commodity, but certainly people are, and your time is, everything is given a value, kind of a monetary value, and trying to look at the world differently. Because one thing I would think is Jesus is always radically different than whatever cultural moment we find ourselves in. I think he's always the kind of like, yes, but let me invert this for you. He did it in his day, but I think he's still doing it for us.
Yeah. So asking that question, or wrestling with that question of what it means to be a Christian in this particular context, in an American context, we have to maybe consider the consumerism that we're touched by, and how that may inform our understanding of the way of Christ, and how it may lead us to view consumerism. Do you want to unpack that a little bit more? So consumerism and how we're attached to these things, and even just, I mean, we can go further and further down that road, but
yeah, I mean, probably all of us are aware of, how we're constantly bombarded with advertising, with appeals to, you need to have this in your life. You need to look like this. You need to dress like this. You need to have these things. That your life will be better if you do. It'll be worse if you don't. And I mean, it's almost a caricature now, how advertising, you'll be happier if your teeth are whiter. So, we're selling you this toothpaste. So I think we're aware of that on one level, but the challenge to not be caught up in that, I think, is an ongoing struggle. And it is for me. I mean, I like all the bright, shiny things that are constantly presented to me and saying, well, wouldn't you like this and the new that? And so somehow grounding ourselves in a sense of our own dignity and our own worth in a way that's not dependent on those kinds of acquisitions and possessions. That's the challenge. it's and it's a bigger challenge because there's just so many options.
Yeah.
At least it seems to me, and so many things that are appealing and can be used in a good way. So this is not a like reject it all as evil.
Yeah.
It's about use of things, not whether or not we actually have things. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to be a more holy person if I don't have any technology. If I don't have a fancy phone, well then I'm a more holy person.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the case. But we do have to constantly be asking, how is this attempting to define our humanity and the humanity of others,
Yeah.
and the nature of a life well lived, and somehow chart for ourselves a different course. And I think we can find, if we think about it, just right now, thinking about, well, where in the Gospels does Jesus seem to be redefining human value and dignity, what is worthwhile, over and against what was common in his day.
Exactly.
It wasn't the same sort of consumerism. There was more of a big gap between the rich and the poor, I think. It was kind of like just a dualism. There were the poor, and then there were the very rich.
Yeah.
We tend to have a bigger spectrum.
That's right. Yeah.
And a lot of little stages. But he's still talking about some of that, which then we've got to seem like apply to our situation. And I don't know how to do that. I'm struggling to do that, and trying to not become overly infatuated with things and use them well and not be possessed by them. But that's not new. We talk about our possessions possess us.
That's right. Yeah.
And we got to realize that danger.
One thing that keeps coming up as you're talking and you're giving these examples, I keep thinking about the way that we see, and how this being a part of this community, like we're not. I'm not like we're still in Scripture, we're still doing a lot of things that look very Christian, right? But I think the way that we're experiencing these things, or even seeing these things, have been changing, right? Because like the Bible stays the Bible, right?
Right.
And
Right.
the sacraments stay the sacraments, but how we see these things, they change. And the same could be true for how we're experiencing the world and consumerism. So does that play a big part in what it means to be a Christian? How we see.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that, because maybe rather than a set of attributes or characteristics or even behaviors or something like that, it seems to me like, Christianity is more of a way of going about things, which there's a commonality in the way in which you go about things, even though the things you might be engaging with would differ from time to time and place to place.
Yeah.
So it's a way of seeing, which it's more general than like, well, Christians do this or Christians behave this way. Well,
Or
yes,
think this way.
yeah, or think this way.
Yeah.
It's it almost to me comes down to it's what you're seeking, it's what you're searching for, and that'd be very similar to the way you see things, or to add to it, what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Right. And we're always in some ways looking for the unattainable.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
We're not utopian, in the sense that, well, we'll finally arrive and then, everything will be great. We'll have mastered this way of Jesus, but then even if you could, something would change and you'd have to go back on the journey to say, how do we react to this new circumstance? So yeah, I like the idea of seeing or looking for what we look for, what we search for, what we seek. So, you might say, well, we seek wholeness and healing
Yeah.
and community.
Uh-huh.
But then again, we ask, well, where are you and what's going on that's preventing community and wholeness and healing?
Yeah.
And so then we find, well, that's where we're having to push back and look at ourselves and say, how am I participating in the brokenness of things rather than the healing of
Yeah.
things, the fragmentation rather than the wholeness. So, yeah. So how do I see? Yeah, I like that. How do I see what the needs are? See my own role.
Yeah, see the people around me, see myself. Yeah.
Well, Jesus uses a lot of analogies about the eye, right?
Yep. Uh-huh.
I'm thinking of what you just said. Yeah, how we see. Yeah, one thing it seems to be fundamentally, true about Christians should be we see first, or we're looking for the log in our own eye and not the
Yeah.
speck in others.
Yep.
That's an orientation
Uh-huh.
of seeing.
Yeah.
What am I looking for? I'm not nitpicking everything else about others.
Yeah.
It's more about self-examination.
Uh-huh.
Than scrutinizing those I think are in the wrong. Yeah. So that's an aspect of seeing.
Yeah.
There's that very enigmatic verse in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says, if your eye is clear, then, the light will be within you. But
Yeah.
if your eye is unhealthy or diseased, is kind of what he's talking about.
Yeah.
If it's not clear, then how great is that darkness in you? And it's just kind of a statement that hangs there, and you're like, what's he talking about? But again, it's about how you see, whether the light comes in, or if your eyes are not attuned to seeing, then you're going to have darkness in you. So yeah, I like what you're saying. Seeing, he seems to talk about it as a metaphor for living the life he's talking about. Yeah.
And I love that you brought up the log in your own eye, because I think part of that is you're able to see yourself maybe more in some ways, maybe more honestly, and maybe more humility than, I don't know, than not. Because if you don't know the log is in your eye, you're walking around thinking there's nothing wrong. So I just love that image, and I think there's a humility. I think there's a recognition that, hey, I don't really know anything,
Right.
and I recognize there's something here preventing me from seeing everything clearly. But hey, I want to get rid of this thing, and I want to participate in healing. So does the desire have something to do with that too? So maybe it's a seeing, and then maybe a desiring for something, something more than what you see, or what you can't see.
Yeah, I like that. You could say, yeah, what does it mean to be a Christian? Well, it means to be someone who humbly is trying to learn more about their own self and find their own faults. That's fundamental to being a Christian. Someone who's on that kind of journey of self-discovery. Show me what I don't know.
Yeah.
Teach me what I'm not seeing in myself. I like that. So humility, yeah. I mean, You've got the verse. It's quoted several times that God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble.
Yeah.
So it would seem like, well, that's germane.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be a Christian? To adopt a humble approach to your own self and your own life in the midst of the world. And what does that look like? How does that work out? And desire. Yeah, what is it that you're seeking? What is it that you long for?
Yeah.
A lot of the Beatitudes, kind of work on that level, and he seems to be challenging. Jesus seems to be challenging what it is that a person's looking for.
Yeah.
As he throws out these, blessed are the poor in spirit, which no one would think they're looking for, but that's about the humility again.
Yeah.
So yeah, seeing and about desire. I like that. Yeah. Do you desire the pure in heart to see God, the poor in spirit? Yeah. Do you even desire to mourn when that's the right thing to do?
Yeah.
Because we're also a culture that's a little bit addicted to happy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Happy, and there's nothing wrong with being happy, but happy in the way in which it's a denial of the tragic.
Yeah, denial of reality,
Yeah,
right?
of lament,
Yeah.
of, almost like, and there's that sense in which, there's a strain of Christianity that everything is to be triumphal and joyful, and it's almost like you're not a good Christian if you're lamenting anything.
Yeah.
And that seems to, be more of the culture, and not really the way of Jesus. In my estimation, it's kind of a danger that we have to wrestle with, is this triumphalism.
Yeah.
Another thing, yeah.
We don't want to see the suffering. We don't really want to talk more as much about, which is something I've experienced a lot with your meditations, your teachings. You talk a lot about the cross.
Yeah.
And I mean, as you talk about suffering and God identifying with that and being magnified through the suffering itself.
Right.
I think that's an important part, I think, too.
Yeah, and if you look at the cross as the throne, which I think is what John is doing in his gospel, that Jesus is spoken of as ascending to the cross, which is ascending to the throne, which is pictured in John's revelation as the Lamb who was slain on the throne. That's challenging to any idea of triumphalism, because the triumph is the cross, right? And so it's not, in some ways, it seems that some versions of Christianity want to get Jesus off the cross. I mean, the cross is necessary, but let's celebrate the resurrection.
Right.
Let's celebrate the ascension. But then they don't seem to realize that the cross is the throne at the right hand of the Father. It really is. That's God in glory, in a way that is, it's mysterious and paradoxical, not impossible to wrap our minds around, but certainly challenging to our ideas of, the worship of happiness.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, how can we not be talking about the cross and yet how God enters into our suffering, and therefore, we should know how to lament and accept reality. Yeah. Because life is sometimes incredibly difficult.
Yes.
And to pretend it's not is to, engage in a delusion.
Yeah. And that's not what we want to do as we're trying to identify with this faith. We don't want to be detached from reality. I think it's, anyway, if anything, it's maybe a more full way of engaging with reality. Maybe, especially if you're getting healed. So as you're getting healed, or you're experiencing salvation, which we also say is healing, there's a different way that you're engaging with reality.
Yeah, I mean, when you're saying that, it's making me think, another definition for what it means to be a Christian is to engage boldly with reality as it is. I mean, AA talks about that all the time, to accept, the things just as they are.
Yeah.
They've got the saying, accept life on life's terms. Not the way I want it to be, but just the realistic assessment of this is how it is. It's incredibly beautiful and magnificent and hard and tragic.
That's right.
It's all of that. So a Christian is a person who, doesn't live in kind of a fantasy version, but also doesn't live in constant despair, like the whole world is awful. That's not true either. That's not reality. That's a denial of the good. So,
and the cross is resting in between those tensions, isn't it?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, because we distinguish, or one useful way is to distinguish the crucifixion from the cross. The crucifixion is the horror of an agonizing death inflicted by people out of jealousy, hatred, and fear. The cross is how God overcomes the crucifixion with a completely different message. In that same moment, it becomes Jesus saying, Father, forgive them. It becomes mercy. It becomes eternal love. It becomes a throne of glory and it's a throne of glory because it proclaims most astonishingly who God is. which is incredibly beautiful in the midst of the horrible reality of this being a gruesome death. It also is showing, what makes life worth living, which is love. So, it's all intermixed in a single moment. And that's why it's the penultimate symbol for Christianity is the cross. And it sets up the paradox of life is both astonishingly beautiful and magnificent and incredibly hard and challenging. And suffering encapsulates a lot of that in the moment when we're suffering.
I had a thought this morning. There's nothing more. One of the things there's nothing more human than suffering, right?
Right.
This is something we're all experiencing to some degree. And
because we're finite, we're fragile, we're vulnerable, we're weak. Suffering, and we could say, well, there's a continuum. There's mild suffering. There's a disappointment that something didn't go my way, but then there's huge suffering, which is agonizing and incredibly painful. But we use the same word, and it's okay. It's like I always encourage people when they're struggling, when they're suffering in some way, not to get into a comparison of suffering. Like whatever you're finding to be suffering right now, it's real suffering. Sure, there's other people who've experienced worse and who are experiencing worse. And if you want to think that for yourself, but I'm not going to bring that up to you, like to diminish your suffering. It's not that bad. There's other people worse off than you. That doesn't honor the fact. But this person, this is their real suffering right now, and it might not be on the scale the grandest, most extreme example, but it's real. So all of it is suffering. From the smaller things, as it were, to the life-altering tragedies. And it's very, very much the human experience. You can't get away from that. I used to joke, the old game shows where, the game host would say, do you want what's behind door number 1 or door number 2 or door number 3? They've got options. They can't see what it is. And I said, there is no the life free from suffering behind door number 2. It's like, that's not one of your options. So, and Christ doesn't give me that. It's not like, well, I become a Christian and now I'll be free from suffering. No, maybe what'll happen is I'll live more honestly, like we were saying, with the reality as it is. Where maybe I would have been more in denial or dismissive, especially of the sufferings of others. But as a Christian, we rejoice with those who rejoice. We weep with those who weep. We don't feel like, well, their suffering isn't my suffering, so it doesn't affect me. We actually should say, their suffering is my suffering. And so, or like Paul says, when one part of the body hurts, the whole, hurts with it. His analogy. So, some ways, Christians are people who enter more deeply into the suffering of others because of compassion and mercy and wholeness. We know that we're bound to others in a way that. To deny that is to deny reality. I am not an independent, autonomous person.
We're all connected.
I didn't give birth to myself. There's others. I exist because of others.
That's right.
And everything in my life, I've not been living on a desert island. Everything is dependent on others. So the illusion that we're somehow autonomous or independent people is. It's just that. It's a fiction, an unhealthy one, and maybe again something in our culture we have to push back against more because our culture is more individualistic, more prone to believe I'm a self-made person. Right. What did you actually ever do that wasn't somehow dependent upon the actions of others? Nothing. So,
and I think it's an illusion to think otherwise. And I think also can be caught up in the illusion of thinking that we're more connected than we are.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? So I think that's something that some people close to me are experiencing. I even experienced this too, like being on social media and
Oh,
thinking
okay.
that I'm connected. You know what I mean?
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean?
At first I didn't know what you meant,
Yeah.
but I see what you're saying.
So
Yeah,
there's an illusion of the connection,
yeah,
and then you start to get around people, and you start to talk to people and touch people. It's like, oh, like this is
Yeah.
different.
we weren't really connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just kind of eavesdropping on their curated lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, what they were putting out there. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not real connection.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because in social media, you're right. We don't know, is the other person really being vulnerable, or they just have an eye to the audience. You know, yeah, what's real, and it's probably, I would say, maybe a little unwise to be too real on social media. Um, I think that being truly vulnerable, you need to do that, not just throw it out there to anyone who might
Yeah.
happen to drop by
Yeah.
and then decide to comment
Uh-huh.
and then say, they talk about people being trolls and hateful. Well, because they're just drifting by, they don't know
Uh-huh.
you, and they just see an opportunity to take a shot at someone,
Yeah.
stab at them, and be mean, maybe for disordered reasons of their own or whatever. Yeah, so I would say with someone you truly know
Mm-hmm.
in a safe environment of trust, that's when we ought to be vulnerable. I reserve my social media stuff for general postings, sometimes a little update,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not going to pour out all my feelings
Yeah. That makes sense.
to the world.
Yeah.
Some people will, well, as Jesus said, you throw your pearls before swine, right?
Yep.
So-
That's
and
a
he
great
said,
way-
well,
yeah.
they'll trample on them and they'll turn around and gore you.
Yeah.
And that's
right.
exactly what happens on social media. Someone says something very heartfelt, and then a bunch of other people just gore them,
Yeah.
over it. And then they feel more wounded than, and maybe they were expressing woundedness, hoping for, of something to come back to reaffirm in a sense of connection, but they get the trolls instead.
Yeah.
Or at least some of that, along with some friends who say, "Oh, I'm praying for you. I feel for you." Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, the illusion of connection. When
Yeah.
there's really no connection.
So a theme I'm picking up with this conversation, and even the way you're defining it, seems like reality plays a big part in this. Reality, seeing reality, seeking, and I guess experiencing reality as it is too. So I'm thinking about how that changes. Like your engagement with reality may change as you learn more, as you have different experiences, and then I'm thinking about like the Christian journey. That's kind of how I'm transitioning into that thought, because where you are is going to affect what you see.
Right.
Right. And so you've done some studies on or you've done some reading on Scott Peck's work, where he kind of charts out the spiritual journey. And I'm not sure, was it Christian, like just a Christian, or was it just a spiritual journey in general that he was talking about?
Well, the book that that summarized some of that, he wrote as a Christian earlier. He was a Buddhist when he wrote The Road Less Traveled. But when he's talking about the spiritual journey in that work, further along the road less traveled, he's actually a Christian at that point. But what he's talking about, I think, would apply to anyone seeking to live a life more connected to what is beyond themselves. That would be my definition for spirituality.
Yeah.
To know there's something more than you, and somehow you need to connect to it.
Yeah.
It's bigger than you.
Yeah.
And I need to somehow connect to that. Well, I think it would apply to anyone, what he talks about. So I think it's general. Yeah. Yeah. And there's some definable stages, just like there are in our human growth.
That's
from,
right, yeah.
From infants to toddlers to adolescents to young adults.
Yeah.
These things are similar, whether it's, the process of human development psychologically, socially, emotionally, physically, or whether we're talking about the spiritual dimension.
Yeah.
It still goes through these stages.
I think
And
that's important
yeah,
to recognize,
yeah,
because we're all one body, but we're seeing different things. So furthermore, because of our different experiences and what we're bringing to the table, but also it could be based on where we are in those stages, right?
right, right. Yeah, what we see, and what we need to see. There was years ago when I was kind of becoming aware of things of which I'd never really been aware, which is stages of spiritual growth and things. There was I think it was called the Alban Institute, and somehow came across some material, and they were talking about the growing edge, like you're saying, wherever you are, there's the edge, which is your boundary and where you need to grow, which is different for each one of us because we're all in different places. Um, but the question was, what is your growing edge? And what it is right now may not be what it is. Well, hopefully it's not.
Yeah.
Won't be what it is in 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the time frames are. Some of those, may take decades. Some may not, depending on which aspect of a growing edge we're talking about. But yeah, it's different. But there's always something there that would be for me the next step.
Yeah.
I mean, you were talking about reality. Richard Rohr, and I used this when we got together as a men's group. His thing is that God is a reality with a face, and some others talking kind of that way, like Elia Delio and others are talking that same way. It's that there really God is reality. God. That's why God is truth. God is what is real, what is actually the case.
Yeah.
Not that different than saying, well, God's the light and everything else is being in darkness. Right? God's the reality and everything else is illusion and fantasy. And so maybe we're saying, well, Christians are those who on this journey are coming more and more to really interface with what is real. Moving out of ignorance and self-deception and all to, whatever analogy, from lightness, from dark to lightness, from death to life, from, false ideas to reality, what is, from falsehood to truth.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we view God as what is actual, true, and real, and realize that I'm somewhere not interacting or perceiving, back to your idea of seeing, I'm not seeing that clearly, and I really never am. My eyesight's never 20/20 in this sense.
Yeah.
It's a process of, but can I see a little more?
Yeah.
I'm on that journey, and maybe that's what one way was. That's what it means to be a Christian, is to be really trying to boldly, with integrity and intention, live in terms of reality as it is.
Another thing that came to my mind as you were saying that part was just posture and the importance of staying open to what could be too. I think that might play an important role too, because like I think I can recognize that I don't see anything, or I don't see all that I can see. There's more I can see, but I can also be close to that, to seeing more. So I think maybe posture has something to do with that. Am I able to stay open to what I can be seeing more, what can be more revealed to me?
Oh, I think that's you hit. That's essential, right? Because if I assume there's nothing more to be learned, there's no more light to receive, well, then the question is, am I really, back to the original question, am I really living as a Christian? Is not a Christian someone who always knows there's more to God than I have yet come to know?
Yeah.
I mean, God's infinite, which by definition means, if we say, well, God is infinite love or infinite mercy or infinite goodness, I really don't know what that means. Infinite stands for that which surpasses my ability to comprehend or measure or really even understand, except as this abstract concept. It goes on forever, but I don't know what forever is.
Yeah.
So isn't a Christian someone who's always tying some of these ideas together, humble in the face of a reality that's bigger than they can wrap their, mind around. And so, yeah, if I'm not open, it seems like I've quit the journey.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's essential to being a Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
There's always more good to come. I had an Australian friend I knew in Africa, and he was an agriculturalist as well as an ordained minister. And he said from their church in Australia, they always had the saying, "God has yet more light to shine." So it was that orientation to the future. There's always more to come.
Yeah.
And they're not saying, we've disregarded the Bible and we found new writings. Nothing like that.
Yeah.
But they're just saying, even in the scriptures we've had for centuries, there's still more in there. Like God can reveal to us.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't some sort of radical leaving, like you're saying, the sacraments or the scripture, or doing things that still look very Christian as they've looked for centuries. But that orientation was, we don't have it all.
Yeah.
We're open. God's still creating.
That's right.
And revealing.
Yeah. And I was even thinking about, just our inability to really know people as well.
Yeah.
to know people.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about my wife. I know her just about. I spend more time with her than anyone on the planet.
Sure.
I still don't know her.
No.
You know what I mean? And so one thing I just keep thinking about is, where do I have any grounds to tell someone,
Right.
Anything? That's kind of how I've been feeling lately. Like, I mean, I want to listen. I want to walk. I want to talk with people and be open to people. But I barely know myself. I barely know the people closest to me. Does that make sense? Am I ringing a bell there?
No. Yeah. Because we don't know ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus' statement that, God knows the number of hairs on your head, which is something that we don't know about ourselves.
Yeah.
Is the origin of the statement that's often made that God is closer to us than we are to ourselves. That's a challenging thing to really contemplate. Okay, so God's closer to me than I am to me. I imagine I'm the one who's closest to me because I am me.
Yeah.
How could anyone be closer to me than me? And I might think I know myself, and I might think I know others, and then I, like you're saying, I want to tell them, like speak authoritatively or with great certainty. When you're saying that, I'm thinking, what I want to do is suggest, tell my story, offer options, but never speak like, I know you so well, I can tell you.
Yeah.
It's like, I need to be open to the fact that there's things about myself and everyone else that I don't know, and that they don't know either. Only God knows.
Yeah.
Who each one of us truly is. So that would tie in again with the humility and the openness and the
there are themes here.
the essence of being a Christian is to embrace the posture, this posture.
So I need to acknowledge what you haven't said.
Okay.
Right. And I think it's important because I think we're trained in similar seminaries, similar I think traditions. And they would probably say some maybe not everyone, but some people would say some different things about doctrine, about belief, about what church you're attending, what kind of baptism you're receiving.
Right.
You haven't said any of that. I haven't heard any of that in your definition of what it means to be a Christian. Yeah. But this is what I'm seeing on the outside. This is what I'm hearing in a lot of spaces. Like this, they're saying this is what it means to be Christian, to believe this, to think this, to go here and worship.
Yeah, where the believe this is like propositional statements, factual statements. Do you believe this to be a true statement? Where everything we're talking about is really more organic. It's the posture, it's the approach to things, it's the seeking of life. It's and all those other things have a place, but they're not. I wouldn't say they're not what make a person a Christian. But they can all be like the baptism that one receives, the the kind of community in which one worships. These can either foster or hinder
Yeah.
the things we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
And ideally, all these things, like the specific doctrines, are things that serve to further me in what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, so the doctrine should be teaching me, because that's what doctrine is, teaching, right? It should be teachings that say you need to look at the log in your own eye more than examine other,
Yeah.
So it should be very specific teachings, which are instilling in me the less like easily definable things of posture and openness, and that's reasonable. Go back to Scott Peck's, way of talking about the stages of spiritual growth, which I realized when I was working in Tanzania that, I'd been through graduate school and I kind of had this like, okay, and then the Tanzanians, as they were becoming Christian, it seemed at first to me like they were being very legalistic. And then I realized, no, they're just coming out of these animistic beliefs and they need very concrete first steps.
Yeah.
They kind of need a law of 10 Commandments, where it is true that the 10 Commandments are really all about love God and love your neighbor. And once you understand that you really don't need the 10 Commandments. You won't do any of those things anyway. You won't steal. You won't bear false. So, but there's a stage where you're not ready for kind of it can be as amorphous as saying, well, it's an openness.
Yeah.
It's like, give me something tangible. Oh, here's some very, very specific things.
Yeah.
So when you realize, again, depending on where we are, that might be what I need, is I need very, very concrete, definable instructions. But in a bigger frame of reference, those are training me in all the things we're talking about, so that I become very Christian with an openness and a humility and a posture towards others and towards embracing reality as it is. But that's what all these little things should be teaching me. The problem is we make those kind of like, well, that's the defining characteristics. It's like, no, those are the stepping stones necessary to get us to really what is the kind of spirit of someone who's following Christ, the spirit of all of this. So yeah, we can make that mistake, but there's a necessary place for all that. And we should understand it's all in service to a greater kind of integrative function in our lives, a wholeness. It should bring about healing, but sometimes we end up, but these things are the thing, right? It's like, no. Then it stops being about healing and it becomes about, keeping the doctrines and the practices and not realizing they're leading you somewhere.
That's right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about those stages?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I love about Scott Peck's, his is not the most elaborate. His is the simplest. And I like it because I like to share it with people. And it's so simple, it's easy for people to remember. So he only has 4 stages. Other people in their way of working it out add more. And there really are more, because anything when you're doing this, you're being reductionistic.
Yeah.
You're taking the complexity of a spiritual life of growth and reducing it to a finite number of stages. So we all should know on the front end, this is overly simplified.
Yeah.
But the 4 stages are, stage 1 is really what he calls a lack of spirituality. It's where a person, and not everyone necessarily really ever experiences this stage. You could say, well, infants are this stage, but we really don't. We don't remember anything. Usually much earlier than about age 4 or something. So, but there are people who experience, even as adults, stage 1, which is basically a lack of any spirituality, and the overriding values are survival. Like, I just got to get what's I need.
Yeah.
And there's not a connectedness or a concern for others. It's just survival's at stake. And so it's all about me. And if it costs you, well, so be it. so that's kind of a devoid of a spiritual dimension. It's living for oneself and one's own needs. Stage 2 is what he calls formal spirituality, and the transition is usually the classic kind of getting converted in Christian terms, like. And the formal spirituality gives you structures.
Church.
Yeah, church. You become a part of community. There's real clear commandments. And so you go from this chaotic living where anything goes and you would do anything just to get what you need. Now you find the sanity of something that's not chaotic, the order of a group, and the sense of belonging. And God is the lawgiver. And the law, his instructions, bring you sanity. And that's where, and he says that kind of conversion happens on a Thursday night, where someone says, okay, I commit my life to Jesus. And they make that transition. They would kind of live in, this self-willed life. And then they say, no, I'm going to follow this way of Jesus. And they become a part of a church. And so it's real. And it saves people. Like it, in the practical sense, they do experience healing. Maybe, life was crazy. Parents were alcoholics. Everything was in chaos, and they found salvation because now everything was orderly, right? But he says the third stage is a questioning stage, where you question. You start realizing that the formal spirituality is also got limits, and so someone who moves from the second stage to the third stage, they start asking questions. But why? And this seems to be true, but not all the time. And these are legitimate questions, right? And he says, when someone's making that shift, it looks to a lot of people like they're losing their spirituality, but actually they're growing. And unfortunately, if the group they're a part of does not have room for questions, then they basically end up not being able to stay in the group.
So leaving the church.
Yeah, because, and sometimes being given ultimatums.
Yeah.
This is what we believe. This is how we look at it. You're asking questions. And so they get invited to leave, pushed out. Or they, take themselves out because people just say, look, there's answers for that, or you shouldn't ask that question. But those are real questions, and they're struggling with how to do that. So, and his point is, if you get in that stage 3 questioning, without someone to guide you, you will never get out, because you can't extract yourself from that stage. Like somebody has to shepherd you, who's been through it, who can come alongside and go, good question. And the disappointing thing is often what they're going to tell you is, and there aren't really good answers. Like you're asked, because it's a question is like, well, why is there so much suffering in the world? Anybody got a good answer for that? No. I mean, people will give you answers, but they sound hollow. They don't seem to really be enough. So his point is the way out of stage 3 questioning into the next stage, which he calls the embrace of mystery or the mystical, is the way a person gets out is they finally accept, you know what? I'm finite. There's things I will never understand. It's the humility. It's like there's questions I can't answer. I might be able to give some direction, like about why there's suffering in the world and stuff, but I can't answer it. It remains an unanswerable question that offends us. For the suffering offends us. Why should little children get cancer? That's offensive. How can God let this happen? There's no answer for that. But we get out of our questions when we realize not that we get the answers we were hoping for, but we realize maybe there aren't answers because we're just finite, and we embrace a kind of living in mystery. Those are the 4 stages. So it's kind of lack of spirituality, formal spirituality, questioning spirituality, and then an embrace of mystery, kind of mystical spirituality.
Yeah.
I like it. It's
Yeah.
so simple.
Uh-huh.
Most people can get it.
Yeah.
He says, the conversion from 3 to 4, there's 2 conversions. From 1 to 2, which is like, I gave my life to Jesus.
Yeah.
And then 3 to 4 is like, well, sometime in that decade, because that's never a one night thing.
Yeah.
It's like when someone looks back and they always point to a period, maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
Like I was so stuck in questions but I somehow found my way. And then this person helped and I read that and, whether those people who shepherded them through were like flesh and blood people that had face-to-face conversations, or maybe authors they read, but they get the help that gets them through, and it takes a time period. It's never an instantaneous decision. Anyway, I find that very useful.
Yeah.
But the growing edge for each place, again, is different. The growing edge for the stage 1 person is order. The growing edge for the stage 2 person is question.
Yeah.
And the growing edge for the stage 3 person is embracing mystery. There's a new challenge with each stage of how you will ultimately progress through it.
And I can guarantee you that everyone on every stage would answer the question of what does it mean to be Christian differently.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Great point. Yeah, the stage 2 person will legitimately say it's keeping these doctrines and following these practices because that is actually what has brought sanity to their life.
Yeah.
And it seems to be making, and it's making their life tons better. So they would identify it that way. Yeah, exactly. And Scott Peck also points out that very few people will make a life journey through all 4 stages.
Yeah.
A 1 to 2 is often a journey. A kind of raised in 2 and move into 3 is a journey. And some people will go 2, 3 to 4, but it's not, or you could be kind of grown up in a very 3 sort of environment.
Yeah.
Very kind of open-minded parents who just expose you to everything and didn't have a whole lot, and that was kind of how you grew up. And, but his point is, don't expect someone to like in one lifetime to go through all 4 necessarily.
Yeah.
And
I
again,
think the model is so helpful because I think it can grant us some humility, right? Some humility. I think it can kind of make sense of why we could be in similar spaces, but like be so different, right? Making sense of our differences more.
And I think being patient
Yeah.
with others, realize they're somewhere else. That and their growing edge may be different. So we can be really patient with others and not be, condemnatory or judgmental. Why can't they, do X, Y? Just maybe what's going on with them is different, and that's okay. Yeah.
Wow. I think that's really helpful. And I want to talk briefly about this Critical Journey book that I was given as I'm getting trained to be a spiritual director. And they kind of chart out those stages too. And the model is similar. I want to read you the stages.
Okay.
And,
Because I'm not familiar with this. So you've referenced it several times.
Yeah.
And I'm interested.
I'm going to read you the stages, and we can kind of compare it to what Scott Peck is doing and just kind of end with that. So stage 1 is the recognition of God. So just being aware that, okay, there is a God, there's something beyond me, right? And then stage 2 is going into the life of discipleship. So it sounds similar to like the church and the order.
The formal, right.
Yeah,
like order, here's things to do.
And along that line, stage 3 is merging into the productive life. So similar to like the life of discipleship, but you're maybe doing more things for the church and just maybe that's like evangelism, that's going on the mission trips. And then stage 4 is the journey inward. So, and they say between, though they say the churches are only able to house people that are in stage 1, 2, and 3. They say anything beyond 3, you're asking. I think you're in the question mark. You're in those questions where it's kind of hard to find a footing when you're in the inward journey or you're in the stage 4. So you might need a spiritual director or a spiritual mentor or books, kind of things outside of the community. And from stage 4, you go into a wall. So this is where people tend to leave the faith because they're at a place where maybe the questions are not being answered. things are just not making sense, so you're just kind of stuck. And they
Right.
say you really need a lot of help to get past the wall. And then stage 5 is the journey outward,
Hmm.
and then it ends with stage 6, which is the life of love. So I
Yeah.
think there's a lot
That-
of
That's very,
connections.
yeah. It's, yeah, I like that. It sounds like it's got the same steps, broken out in even more parts. Yeah, I like that. I really like that. Yeah, Scott Peck would say generally people who are stage 1 and 3 are not in church, and people who are stage 2 and 4 are. But the stage 4 people, when they're in church, are always those kind of people that everyone else in the church goes, I don't know about them.
Yeah.
I mean, they seem to be Christian, but they're kind of not,
Yeah.
like his example was, but they'll have a beer once in a while. Which, when he's writing way back,
That was a big deal.
decades ago, right? It's like, hey, that's outside the bounds of what's
Yeah.
acceptable. So yeah, he made the same point. It's like you'll find those people in church who are the stage 4 kind of mystical,
Yeah.
but they make the other people uncomfortable because they won't follow kind of. It's kind of reminds me of Jesus. It's like he's definitely a moral person,
Yeah.
but he doesn't always honor the Sabbath.
Yeah.
It's like he bothers me. He
Yeah.
won't follow the rules,
And
yet I can't say he's an out and out, heathen. Like he's just living a wanton life. He's not.
Yeah.
But he won't follow the rules. Yeah, it sounds very similar. Sounds like that's the critical journey is the same sort of thing.
And for those listening, that is The Critical Journey by Janet Hagberg and Robert Ulick. They wrote the book together, and it's just really helpful. And I just want to end just with commending you and your work as a pastor. Over 40 years of doing this, your writing, your thinking, I think is very important and very helpful. And I think this is kind of bold to say, but I think you're able to address all of those stages in the way that you're presenting your work, and your humility and your ability to be around different people. I would guess that I would be comfortable bringing anyone I know on whatever particular stage to you, and knowing that, hey, this person's going to be heard and seen, and maybe communicated in a way that they need to be communicated with, because you're very incarnational and you're very
Oh, good.
very present and very open. So I just want to thank you for who you are. I want to thank you for your ministry and your work, because it's teaching me so much. It's only been 2 years that I've been around you, but it's teaching me so much, and it gets me excited for what we're doing and what we're trying to do as pastors, as ministers of the church. So I want to thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate your words. Yeah. To your point was, I did see, I think that was that Alban Institute that I was talking about. They had something about how you teach, to try and teach when you know you've got all this diversity in the listeners. They said, speak first to your stage 1 and 2 people, because they won't hang with you later. But your stage 4 and 3 type people, they'll keep listening, right? So they kind of said, try it up front, say things that these folks will get, but then you can say stuff that kind of maybe they're like, I don't get that part, but the other people waited for that. I don't know if I try and do that well, but I've always remembered that and thought about, if I think about who's in a class or something, and people with all different concerns, and how do you, the mystery of how do you speak to that? I don't know. I don't know.
But that makes sense to kind of prioritize those, and then maybe other things will flow with the other stages.
Right. And the other thing would be, it's obviously easier when we can interact, when we're not interacting in a kind of a plenary group, a large gathering where people have got all different things going on in their lives and stages of spiritual formation. One-on-one, hopefully, you can talk, very practically with someone who needs the practical, and you can wrestle with the questions with someone's wrestling, you can share the mystery with those who have the mystery in mind. Meet everyone. But I think you do that very well. I mean, I appreciate your words. I'm really enjoying our work together, because I think you, everyone keeps saying, and it's almost, I you probably get tired of like, for your age, it's like, don't say that. But I know what they're saying is like people are impressed with the kind of thoughtfulness and the kind of awareness you're bringing to things, which, they're recognizing it's rare.
Yeah.
And you're doing that well.
I
So
appreciate that.
I appreciate you, and I'm glad you gave me the synopsis of
Yeah.
the critical journey.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
I
I want to thank you for this discussion. Thank you for being so generous in just what you're talking about and just thinking about different ways to frame it, because there's a way to get on here and say everybody's wrong but me. You know what I mean? So I appreciate that. And I thank you so much for this discussion.
Well, thank you.
I want to thank you again for listening to this conversation in its entirety. We didn't really have any questions in mind. We had a topic in mind with this discussion, but all the questions just kind of came naturally. And I think part of that is just, first of all, sharing the same space together. There's something different that happens when I'm in a room with someone versus like having a video interview with them. There's just some energy that is different about that experience. And furthermore, me and Greg, we spend a lot of time together, so we're able to just feed off of each other well. So I'm grateful for that conversation. And with all that in mind, based on what we've said and what we've talked about how to define Christianity, I want to end this conversation with this prayer. Ultimate reality, come to us as we are, wherever we are, however you can. Grant us the ability to remain open to what is, seeing more and more as you do. With the posture of Christ, increase our love, decrease our resistance, and set us free to be who we truly are. This is our prayer in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.